Hi everyone. In this session we're going to be having a look at conforming using image sequences. This could typically be using a DPX file sequence as opposed to using the typical type of media such as QuickTime files or MXF type of media. So when it comes to working with these particular type of file formats, certain rules and steps have to be obeyed in order for the conforms to be successful. So one of the things we're going to do before we actually go into the creative finishing tools is to have a look at the whole process, the actual workflow which needs to be followed in order to make your conforming successful when it comes to finishing using image sequences. Now you can be using any creative cut tool you desire. In this case I'm actually going to be using Final Cut Pro, but this could also be an Avid Media Composer. What you need to do is follow these few basic steps. So one thing that works when it comes to conforming is to always make sure that your metadata matches throughout the entire production pipeline. So for example, the main crucial elements that you need to be looking after are things like tape name and timecode. To illustrate this, here inside of Final Cut, we're just going to go ahead and focus on the Final Cut Pro bin. Inside here, I've got some QuickTime files. Now these QuickTime files that we have are the files that actually came off the DPX sequences. So for example, if you had material that had been basically scanned off a film scanner, the film scanner would then create a set of media that could then be used at the creative cut level. So essentially, during the creative cut, you wouldn't necessarily be working with image sequences directly. You may be working with QuickTimes, as I mentioned before, or any other type of movie media. The main point to point out here is if I just move the bin forward, you can see that we have got the media files with their various time codes. These time codes, this metadata information must correlate to the DPX sequences in order for the conform to be successful. In addition to this, if I just scroll down a little bit further on, you can use whatever type of media suits your system, as well as making sure that the real names that you're going to be using also correlate to the DPX sequences. I can't stress enough how much the metadata needs to match up in order for the conform to be successful. So the media that we're using here inside of Final Cut Pro is media called Robinsons, and it's courtesy of Sonofilms in Denmark. It is a multi-layered EDL, and what we'd like to do is we'd like to go ahead and rebuild the conform at the finishing stage. There's also a wave soundtrack, which is a scratch track, which could be replaced with the final mix at a later stage. So in order for us to take the sequence and move it into smoke or flame for that matter, we can do it in a number of ways. We can either export out each layer as a separate EDL, and we recommend using CMX 3600, or you could use an XML in Final Cut Pro or an AAF if you're using an Avid Media Composer. So in this case, I'm going to take my sequence and we're going to tell Final Cut Pro to export this out as an XML file. Normally we tell people we support the version 2 interchange format, but I've been using the version 5 with great success as well. So if I was to go ahead and export out an XML, we'd navigate to a directory where we could place the XML itself, and I'm simply going to write it into that directory. Now to show you how my file structure has been laid out is quite a nice thing to see. So what we've basically got here is I've simply got a folder, and the folder in there is called Robinsons Conform. Inside this conform you can see I've got various directories. So here is an audio directory containing my scratch track, here is a directory containing the QuickTimes with their various numbering, as well as the actual XML file. In addition to this, you can see that there's a directory called DPX. Inside this DPX, you can see I've got folders, and each of these folders or directories represents a tape number. Inside these, you can see that I've got a resolution folder. So depending on the film scanner that you may be using, or if you're rendering from another media into DPX sequences, the normal working practice is to actually have a resolution folder in between the tape name. This helps you identify it if you've got lots of different resolutions coming off a single reel. Inside here you can see here are the DPX files. So each one of these frames has got an embedded time code, and all of these collectively reflect exactly what is going on inside of these QuickTime files. Hence the reason for being able to have all the metadata correlate between the movie files you're using and the image sequences you're going to be conforming to. You can see that I've actually neatly arranged things, and this media could be on my local storage, it could be on a network, it could be on a SAN. I definitely recommend working on your housekeeping skills just to ensure that things are correctly aligned so you don't have to search for media all over the place. It helps just to arrange it in a nicely looking file structure. Once we've done all this, so what we've done is we've ensured that the media actually works, it collaborates and collectively matches the metadata of the image sequences. We've also exported the timeline from the creative cut stage. We now need to go ahead into our finishing applications and start to build the timeline, and we want to base it directly off the DPX files rather than the QuickTime or DNxHD media. So I'm going to be using Smoke on the Mac to illustrate this example, but this could very easily work for Smoke on Linux as well as Flame. Inside of Smoke, we're going to go straight into the clip library database. So inside here currently I have a database which is empty. What you need to do now is from this point is to expose the network into this interface so we can access the media and access the metadata files such as the XML. So to do this, I simply go to my network panel, and inside the network panel you can go ahead and actually navigate to where the media is located on your network. You could also go ahead and set selection sets or bookmarks to the location of that media. So for example, if this is something you do on a daily basis, you can create your selection sets per project or per user and constantly go to these areas without having to always navigate manually to where it is. Once it's saved, it's simply accessible. Now, coming out of the network panel, we can go ahead and expand out the options here, and you can see that we've got something called the gateway. The gateway allows our database to visually see all the external directories outside of the database. Now, being able to pinpoint exactly which location we want means that we're looking at exactly the folder structure that we need to see, rather than having lots of different folders and having to try and find where your material is. So inside here, we're now looking at the Robinson's DPX Conform directory on the file structure, and there is the folder sequence that I had created earlier and showed you in the file browser. So inside here, once again, we've got the audio files, we've got our DPX sequences arranged. You can see that the file structure is actually showing me the files as a collected thumbnail, and I can scrub through these as well as play them back in real time to see what the media looks like before actually using it. In addition to this, you can see that we've got some EDLs. We've also got the original QuickTimes that we used. So these are the QuickTimes that we used in the offline. And then finally, down here at the bottom, we've then got the XML file that was exported out of Final Cut Pro. Now what we need to do is we need to start telling Smoke or Flame exactly how it should be dealing with media. So let's focus on the media that we're going to be using, and this is the actual image sequence. So if I select this DPX image sequence and we just double click on it, this brings up the metadata tab for this, and this is found under import settings. Now inside the metadata tab, you simply set the settings as to how the files are going to be imported. So for example, you can choose whether the tape name comes from a file name within the file, does it come from a directory, where does the timecode come from. Now DPX is the most popular format to be using at the moment to do file-based conforming because so much metadata can be embedded in the file. So for example, timecode would typically be stored in the header. Now considering the way that I've actually built the file structure where my tape name is actually a directory name, we want to go ahead and set the tape name to be based on the directory. The other thing to point out is that the actual image sequence is sitting in a resolution folder, not in the tape name folder. So we actually want the tape name to come from 2 folders up. So this is where we could go ahead and say, right, I would like the tape name to come from directory, and then you set the levels up. So in this case, it's 2 levels, so the tape name will be based on roll 1. Now, all the settings you set here, and this can be customized for a whole range of different formats, all of these settings are known as rules. And you can go ahead and save these rules once again per project or per user. This will ensure that if you're constantly importing a material and doing the same thing over and over again, you'll ensure that the rules that you set for the actual metadata will always be interpreted in exactly the same way. So, how can I bring this media into the system? Well, very simply put, what I'm going to do is split the view into 2. If I select this DPX sequence that we have and simply drag and drop it into the database, it then gets applied. Now if I select this clip and press the L hotkey, okay, you could also do this by changing the clip display from proxies to list view. You will notice that it says tape name roll 1, and you'll also see that the time code we're seeing here is coming from the file. So this is embedded in the header. Just to show you, I'm just going to sidetrack slightly. If I was just to go back to my proxy view and we just delete this file, and I say this time, let's take this particular clip and maybe change the tape name. So we want the tape name to come from the actual file name itself. If I was then to just select this clip, make sure you refresh the selected clip. When you drag and drop it in, it gets applied in just as before, but if I was to go ahead and switch back to the list view, you will see how the tape name now says Robinson. Straight away, it's worth pointing out that this is the incorrect tape name, so I want the tape name to come from the actual directory rather than the file header itself. So once again, what we'll simply do is I'll take this clip, set the rule that I wanted to use, and then from this rule, we want to go ahead and just drag and drop that in. So you can see once again, if we select this clip, switch to the list view, we now have got the correct tape name. So this is basically just bringing the file sequences in as a clip that I can use. We can also swipe over to the right and you can see the metadata, the timecode that is relevant to this DPX sequence at the moment. But we want to go ahead and build the conform. So we're going to leave this exposed just for a minute, and I'm going to scroll down to the XML directory, and if I open it up, you can see there is the XML file. If I want to start adjusting the settings of this, you simply come to the FCP XMLs/AAF directory, and this is where you can set the metadata options. Now, this now brings in a couple different sets of things you need to be aware of. Firstly, if you are offlining perhaps at a different resolution, so if I'm doing something at standard def or maybe at a different bit depth, inside the XML as well as an Avid AAF, these files actually remember their resolutions. So if I was simply just to take this file and drag and drop it straight into the library, if I was to Alt and hover over this clip, you will see the description that I've been given says that it's 1920 1080 8-bit, but the media I'm actually using is 1920 1080 10-bit. So inside of the conforming process, we need to make sure that the timeline we're creating is the resolution of the media that we're going to be conforming to. To illustrate this, what you simply need to do is change the clip resolution. So for example, if I was to set this simply to PAL, and now I just drag and drop the XML inside there, you can see when I now hover over this as well, it now tells me it's now PAL at 10-bit. So this is equally important. Now, if your media is a different resolution to the timeline you're conforming, not to worry, Smoke Flame will simply resize the media to be the resolution of the timeline. So it will automatically deal with this for you. So in this case, if I just get rid of this file over here, and I just scroll up, we can simply take the DPX sequence that we have and copy the resolution from that clip. So I know when I do my conform, the resolution of my DPX sequence will be the resolution of the timeline, which will hopefully make a much more successful conform. Now, I noticed that when I was dragging and dropping the XML, it wasn't linking to anything. And the simple reason is coming down to the media options. Here is where you set the search criteria. How does the XML locate its media? Now, the XML is in its own little subdirectory. Okay, so you can see there it is. So at the moment, when the search criteria occurs, it looks within the XML directory to find the media. But the media obviously doesn't exist there. The media is in its own DPX folder. So we actually need to search one level up from the XML directory. So in terms of the search criteria, you simply set the level to be one level up. Now, we want to go ahead and do a little bit of a conform here. But bear in mind, considering the folder structure I've created, I've got the original QuickTime files as well as the DPX files in the same vicinity. So when the XML goes and does its search, what is it going to look for first? This is all based on the search criteria settings we've set here. So by default, I've got it set to use file name. So this means if I was to take my XML and drag and drop this into the default library, it will search for the media and it will find media and link to it. What this has actually done is this has gone ahead and re-linked the timeline back to the original QuickTime media. So if I zoom in, you can see that it says the MOV files, and if I just call up the properties by holding Alt and hover, you can see that it actually tells me that these are QuickTime movies. So essentially, we've just rebuilt the offline in the finishing level, but using the offline media rather than the image sequences. So we need to be very, very specific to the Creative Finishing tool exactly what the media is and where it's going to be coming from. So I'm simply going to delete this conform, which is the wrong one, and we'll try the conform again. This time we're going to select the XML, and instead of using file name, so the XML, if you're just conforming QuickTime files, you can simply conform them off the file names, but since we want to confirm it off DPX files, and DPX files need tape name and timecode, we're going to change the search criteria to rather focus on tape name and timecode. In addition to this, because I'm using DPX files, I'm going to tell Smoke to only look for files that are DPX based. You can also turn on consolidate and you can set the maximum amount of handles if you want to only use a certain amount of media rather than all the media that may be accessible to you. This time, if I now take the XML and I drag and drop it back into the library, it will then do the conform and it will create a link for me. So if I now take this conform that has just been created, we load this up onto the desktop, and if I open up the timeline, what we now have is we now have a new conform, and if I zoom in there, you can see we have now just pulled a conform using DPX files. So it's crucial to understand what settings you've set up in order to do the conform, and if I alt and click over these clips, you can see this is now pointing to the DPX files rather than the offline QuickTime media. The one thing you'll also notice is that the audio scratch track is now a light color, and this means that this audio is missing. This is also indicated by what is going on in the library. So you can see it says unlinked audio. The reason why the audio has not linked to the timeline this time is because we were so strict with the search criteria that it only looked for DPX files. It did not look for audio. However, my audio is still present inside of its own directory. So we want to go ahead and link the audio into this timeline without having to rebuild the timeline from scratch. So to do this, we go ahead, we select the timeline we would like to affect, and you go to your Tools option. In your Tools menu, you can simply choose Relink, and we choose to relink from the gateway. What this means is this timeline is now going to search this exposed gateway and look for the media. It is very important to ensure that the media you're going to be linking to is explicitly viewed. So you can see it is actually exposed. If the directory was closed like this, it would not find anything and it won't link. So make sure if you're going to be relinking from the gateway, the media you're using is explicitly seen. Once this is done, you simply take the clip that we want to relink to, you make sure it's selected, you click relink, it will say detect the number of media to relink to, you confirm, it says do you want to try relink, and I hit confirm one more time, and you can now see there is the WAV file, it's been brought in as a separate clip, and you can see that there are no more error messages telling me that there's missing media. So if I now take this timeline, we load this up to the desktop one more time, and then if I double click on this, we now have got our DPX sequence successfully relinked, as well as the audio being relinked into the timeline. Just to recap what we've done, there's basically about 7 steps. So the first step is always ensure that the QuickTime media matches the DPX media in terms of the metadata tape name timecode, and same thing for Avid as well. Make sure that whatever media you're using, the metadata all matches up. The second step is to export out the XML from Final Cut Pro or AEF from the Avid and put it in a logical place near the media. The third step is when you come into Smoke or Flame, simply set up your gateway. This will then expose all the media as well as the metadata files so you can successfully relink. The fourth step is remember to set the rules for the type of formats that you're going to be importing in. This will make your life a lot easier if you're constantly doing this on a daily basis. The fifth step, remember, set your sequence options. You can see just by doing certain settings, I get completely different results. So in the case of doing a file-based conform, remember to set the resolution of the timeline to the file sequence resolution. Remember to search for tape name and time code rather than file name. And also remember to use the up level if you need to search a directory upwards within the file structure that you've put your XML, your AEF, or any of your file sequences. Step 6, drag and drop. So simply drag and drop your timeline into the library, and Smoke or Flame will search for the media and build the timeline for you. And then lastly, the 7th step is you see the audio. If you need to, simply go ahead and expose the media that you want to link to, explicitly expose it, and then do a relink from gateway. Hopefully these steps will help you conform file-based sequences in a very successful way, and if there's anything you have to ask, please feel free to send feedbacks through to the blog. Thank you very much for your time, guys. I'll be seeing you soon.